Between 1971 and 1972, a killer was on the loose in the Washington, D.C. area. He strangled, raped, and even stabbed 6 young African-American girls ranging in age from 10 to 18 years old. To date, no one has been formally identified as being responsible for their murders, and although there have been suspects, the killer is still unknown. This is the unsolved case of the Freeway Phantom. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potimer. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome, welcome, welcome. And for our Hawaiian listeners, aloha, aloha, aloha.
Aloha.
There you go.
I want to be in Hawaii right now.
You and me both. Thank you.
The shores of Maui. Oh,
yep.
Hawaii is one of my favorite places.
I've never been yet. I know. We've talked about it.
We have talked about it. I've been 3 or 4 times. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Aloha, aloha, aloha. Well, wherever you're listening, even if it's in Hawaii, like, rate, and review. That helps other people to find us. And you can always go to our closed Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws. We love those people in there. All you got to do is answer a few questions and you're in.
Yep.
In and in, since we're doing things in threes.
It's a very simple process, so come on down.
So simple, and we would love to have you. I always post extra information and stuff in there, pictures.
And it's just a fun time.
And your fellow in-laws and outlaws, you can decide which one you are.
Yep.
Are always adding information into the group.
Yes.
Well, I am going to get started on this one this week. This is an older case, 1971, 1972. A lot of our listeners weren't even born yet.
I was a little kid.
I was a tiny little thing in 71, 72. But I had to do a little bit of history research, too, while I was going through this. This is an unsolved case. Unsolved, and I'm going to give you some information at the end in case you know something. Okay. Because they're still looking for a killer.
Be a part of the
solution. Be a part of the solution.
There you go. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, before I get started, I want to thank some sources. The Washington Post, grunge.com, the Washington City Paper, Investigation Discoveries, People Magazine Investigates, unresolved.me, and the Big Book
of Serial Killers, yes!
And the Big Book of Serial Killers.
I wait for that every week. All right, here we go.
April 1971, 13-year-old Carol Spinks is one of 8 children being raised by a single mother. Carol is an identical twin. Her sister Carolyn was her constant companion. So Carol and Carolyn, but they call Carol Bebe.
Okay.
These two were very close, as you might imagine, twins. They like to fool people, their teachers and their friends. And according to their older sister, Evander, one of the girls liked to talk a lot and the other one did not at all. And Carol was the quiet one.
Gotcha.
According to her family, Carol was a tiny little thing at 13 years old, maybe 4'11" feet tall. She was itty-bitty, and she was very timid. She was finishing up her 7th grade year at Johnson Junior High School. Okay. Carol loved to jump rope and hula hoop. I loved to jump rope and hula hoop.
I think I had a hula hoop when I was a kid.
Back in the day when we didn't have phones and iPads and we just got sent outside to play, I was always with my jump rope and my hula hoop.
Hula hoop by Whammo.
Yeah. Are they even around anymore?
I think so. I had my Super Ball from Whammo. Remember those?
No.
Super balls were the really compressed rubber that you bounce the ball and go
and it would go really, really high.
Yeah, 20 miles up in the sky. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, then come down, put somebody's eye out. Right. That's probably why Whammo's not around anymore.
Just like lawn jarts.
lawn darts. Are they called jarts?
Yeah, well, there was different names.
Oh, I thought they were lawn darts. Yeah.
And as a kid, you would, when mom and dad wasn't around, you'd throw them straight up in the air and everybody would run.
You were trying to hurt somebody.
We'd all throw them up in the air and then everybody run as
Back
fast
in the day when when we had dodgeball, too.
Exactly.
I know. We're showing our age, honey.
That's all right.
That's why we always think that we're so tough. Rob's a baby boomer, but I'm Gen X, and we just think we're tough because it was like, if you got hurt, rub some dirt on it, move on.
And that's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead.
Well, on the evening of Sunday, April 25th, 1971, 13-year-old Carol, or Bebe, and her siblings, including her twin sister, are inside the family apartment on Wheeler Place Southeast in D.C.'s Congress Heights.
Okay.
Their mom, Allentine, is gone to visit a relative in Maryland, and according to Evander, the rule of the house was when Mama isn't home, you, quote, don't even open the door for Jesus Christ himself if he knocks, unless I tell you to let him in, end quote.
And when Mama says that, you mind her.
And that I heard this interview, I saw this interview, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's something I would say to my own children. Even if Jesus Christ knocks on the door, unless I tell you to open that door, you don't do it.
That's funny.
But they do hear a knock on the door, and it's their big sister, Valerie. She's 24 years old. Now, Valerie doesn't live with them anymore, but she's in the area visiting a friend who lives in the apartment complex. She wants somebody to go to the store for her to buy TV dinners, bread, and sodas. Back in the day when we had TV dinners.
Yeah.
I used to think a TV dinner was just like amazing.
Oh, yeah.
That was the coolest thing ever.
My favorite was the banquet TV dinners with fried chicken.
Of course it was.
Oh, yeah.
Of course it was. Do they even make TV dinners anymore?
I doubt it.
Now it's like a bowl with quinoa and something. We were probably eating lead paint and just didn't even know about it. We were eating something so horrible for us and didn't know about it.
New fried chicken with lead paint.
I just feel like back then, or maybe we weren't. Maybe we were eating stuff with real ingredients way back then, and it didn't get synthetic until we got a little bit older.
Yeah.
But she wants somebody to go to the store for her. And according to Evander, they said, nope, Mom said, do not go outside. Mm-hmm. And Valerie gets angry. She keeps banging on the door. And Carol gets tired of it and says, okay, fine, I'll go. I'll do it. And she's off to buy groceries at a 7-Eleven located a half of a block away from home, just across the border in Maryland. And on her way to the 7-Eleven, who does she run into? But her mom.
Oops.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Mom.
Yeah, who gets on her because she's left the apartment when she was told not to. And her mother is like, I'll see you when you get home, which I took to mean we're going to have a discussion about this because you defied my orders. When you get back from the 7-Eleven,
well,
we'll be talking about this.
Especially back then, a look from your parent or, a phrase or whatever just instilled fear and terror.
Oh, I can still do that to my grown children. To our grown children, I can do this.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I can. So her mother, Allentine, watches Carol go all the way into the store. She's wearing a red sweater, blue shorts, and brown socks. 30 minutes later, Carol's sister goes across the hall to find Valerie and say, where's Bebe? And Valerie is confused, and she's like, wait a minute, she isn't back yet? Because she's thinking that she went home first instead of across the hall to the friend's apartment. Mm-hmm. And Evander goes to the store. Sister Evander goes to the store looking for her sister, Carol. And the cashier tells her that, yeah, she was here, but she left. And when Evander gets home, there's still no Carol.
Gotcha.
So when Allentine, the mom, gets home, her kids are worried sick about their baby sister. And Allentine calls the police immediately. She tells them that her daughter is missing. But the police tell Allentine that Carol has just run away from home. But Carol's mom knows her daughter has not run away. So she gets together a search party of people who go looking for her daughter. And after hours of searching, they know that something bad has happened.
Sure.
6 days later, on May 1st, little Carol's body is found at 2:46 in the afternoon behind St. Elizabeth's Hospital on an embankment next to the northbound lanes of I-295. A group of kids were playing in the area, which is behind St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And just for the record, St. Elizabeth's Hospital housed psychotic killers, Vietnam soldiers suffering from PTSD, and other serious mental disorders in patients.
Okay.
It was the area's primary mental health hospital. Detectives John Moriarty and Roy Lamb are on the scene. She had abrasions and bruises on her body. She had contusions around her throat. These homicide detectives go to the Spinks' home to let Allentine know that they found her little girl. And of course, she's beside herself, as you might imagine.
Sure.
And her siblings feel like they'd let their little sister down because they were like, we shouldn't have let her out of the house.
Right.
The coroner's report revealed that she had been both physically and sexually assaulted. She'd been hit in the face more than once. She suffered cuts to her face, neck, arms, and hands, so she had some defensive wounds, too. She'd been sodomized and strangled to death. She was dressed, but she was missing her shoes.
Okay.
She also has undigested food in her stomach, in particular a citrus fruit, so like an orange or a grapefruit. She was missing for 6 days, which meant that during that time she was kept alive and somebody fed her. Someone had kept her alive for a few days before killing her.
Wow.
Her body had only been decomposing for 2 or 3 days, and she'd been missing for close to a week. On her clothes, they found small green synthetic fibers from a carpet or a rug. Now, I'm just going to tell everybody right now, before I get into the other murders, this case is going to piss you off royally.
Okay.
Every which way we turn in this case, it's going to make you angry. But that's why I wanted to do it, because they are still looking for clues.
Okay.
The D.C. police searched the neighborhood looking for anyone or anything that might know or point to little Carol or her killer. Among the detectives is a young black woman, Detective Romaine Jenkins. And what police find out is that a lady and her daughter are walking on Wheeler Road, the road where Carol was on, and they see Carol coming from the 7-Eleven. She's carrying a bag. So she made it out of the store and was on her way home, which is a half a block from her apartment complex. She had been taken really, really close to home.
Wow.
So they know the area where Carol was abducted, but they don't know anything else, and the police need to do more investigative work. But here's the problem. In 1971 in the United States, the riots and protests are happening everywhere over the war in Vietnam. And in particular, in May of 1971, the Capitol in D.C., it's overrun by thousands and thousands of people who are protesting everywhere. It's like Forrest Gump at the Washington Monument kind of thing.
Right.
So the police are locking up the rioters and the protesters, and there's no more room in the inn, so to speak. They set up these camps, and all the police officers are called in to do this work. They are overwhelmed with rioters.
Gotcha.
So when this young African-American homicide officer named Romaine Jenkins says, I'm going up to Southeastern, which is the area where Carol disappeared, she's told, no, you aren't. The whole department is on prisoner alert, and that includes the homicide squad. And even though Carol's family continued to search for answers, the abduction and murder of Carol Spinks, age 13, is buried in a stack at the police station.
Jeez.
2 months later, on July 8th, 1971, Darlenia Denise Johnson, a 16-year-old girl from the exact same neighborhood as Carol, goes missing. She lived just a few blocks away from Carol Spinks in Congress Heights. Darlenia also lives on Wheeler Road. On the morning of July 8th, she said goodbye to her mother and began walking to work around 10:30 in the morning. She has a summer job at Oxon Hill Recreational Center as a counselor. And before she leaves, she tells her mom that the rec center had a sleepover that night for the kids that would be going until the following morning. So it's like a lock-in.
Right.
And she sets out for work, but she never arrives. Her mom, Helen, files a missing persons report. One witness reported having seen Darlenia in an old black car driven by an African-American male shortly after her abduction. Another witness said they saw her with her boyfriend, and still another said that she was with an unidentified black male. In the week and a half after Darlenia goes missing, her mother gets a bunch of phone calls. Helen would answer the phone, and the person on the other line wouldn't say anything, but she could hear her breathing. And Helen thinks that maybe it's her daughter, Darlenia, calling. But then she gets a call, and the breather speaks and says, quote, I killed your daughter, end quote.
Wow.
So for all you youngsters out there, we didn't always have caller ID. You didn't know who was calling, and you could get heavy breather on the phone. I can remember being a little girl and answering the phone at my parents' house.
Yeah.
And there was a heavy breather on the other end.
My grandmother, my grandma Potter, she was hilarious. she got one of those phone calls and it kept repeating. And the guy would call and he'd say something dirty or breathe or whatever. Finally, the last time that he called, it's my grandma. She goes, honey, there's nothing you can say that will offend me because I've probably done them all anyway.
Yeah.
And he hung up and never called again. Which she never did, but she was just quick.
Good old Grandma Podorf.
Love her.
Yeah. But Darlenia's mom is getting this call, Helen, and he says, I killed your daughter. And Helen calls the police, but at that time, they couldn't trace the call. No caller ID, can't trace the call. They're clueless.
Right.
But Helen isn't the only one who got a call. The police got an anonymous call with the location of Darlenia's body and details only the killer would know, but nothing is done. And then an employee of the D.C. Department of Highways and Traffic began experiencing car trouble. He pulled over to the side of I-295, not too far away from where the body of Carol Spinks had been found a few months prior. And within moments, he discovers a body laying in the grass. And this regional employee called D.C. police and let them know, there's a body in the grass over here. But he would later discover that his call was the second that police had received about the body that day. And despite these numerous sightings of a body alongside the interstate, police seemed very hesitant to dedicate any time to this matter.
Wow.
So a couple of beat cops would be sent out to investigate the scene, but made very little attempt to locate the body. They didn't even get out of their car to look for the remains before using their radio to call in a 10-8, which also means nothing to see here.
What?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Several days pass. It's July.
Ugh.
It's hot.
Yep.
And the temperature is just off the charts. Finally, on July 19th, 1971, the original caller, the second caller, not the first one, the highway department guy that found the body, he goes back to the scene just to make sure that somebody has taken care of this. And she is still there. The body is still there.
Jeez.
She's still there. So this person who discovered the body roughly a week ago and had called the police found that the remains were undisturbed, as if nobody had even given the body a second glance, and the summer heat had really taken its toll. Now he is fit to be effing tied. This highway department employee calls their boss and lets him know about the police inactivity. And their boss then decided to make a call to a friend of theirs, Charles Bodden, a police sergeant in Washington, D.C. And Bodden wasn't even on duty that day, but he was able to make his way to the scene where he finally got the police involved.
What?
I told you this whole case is going to just piss you off to no end.
Did they have any reason why they didn't check into it?
Well, they said they checked into it, but the two police officers didn't get their fat asses out of the car. They're too busy shoving donuts. I'm sorry. If you're a police officer, the men in blue, I have all kinds of respect for you guys.
We love you guys.
You put your life on the line every single day. But this is absolutely
inexcusable.
It's inexcusable. It's infuriating.
Yeah.
So 11 days later, on July 19th, 1971, Darlenia's body is found only 15 feet from where Carol Spinks' body had been found on I-295. And by that time, her body was so far decomposed, and the medical examiner said her body's been out in the July heat for 11 days, and facial identification isn't even possible.
Oh, my goodness.
So they go to their missing persons reports and find Darlenia, and then based on her clothing and her fingerprints, they know that it's her. And because she's so badly decomposed, the coroner can't even determine the cause of death or if she had been sexually assaulted. But law enforcement was able to find evidence of strangulation. Again, she was dressed, but her shoes were missing.
So we have a shoe fetish?
Taking the shoes. And this is going to come up again, so hang on.
All right, hang in.
8 days later, on July 27th, 1971, on the opposite side of the city, 10-year-old Brenda Faye Crockett is home with her mom. The Crockettts lived in a quiet neighborhood of row houses at 12th and W Streets in Northwest, about a block from Cardoza High School. Brenda was a beautiful little girl. She's tiny, around 4.5 feet tall. She had a dimple in her chin. She loved church. That was one of the things I read about her, that she loved going to church. And around 7:30 p.m. that night, Brenda's mom sends her to the grocery store, a grocery store that is a block and a half away, to pick up bread and dog food for their 3 dogs, Ringo, Rex, and Romeo.
Ringo,
Rex, and Romeo.
That's funny.
And according to Brenda's sister, Bertha, the family was going to watch a movie that night. And when Brenda leaves the house, she's barefoot and she has curlers in her hair. Her mother tells her to take a friend with her, but Brenda goes alone. When Brenda doesn't come home right away, her mother goes looking for her. And while her mom's out looking for Brenda, around 9:20 p.m., the phone rings at the Crockett's house. Bertha, who is only 7 years old at the time, answers. She had waited at home while the rest of her family was searching the neighborhood. Brenda Crockett is on the other line, crying and saying, quote, "A white man picked me up and I'm heading home in a cab," end quote. And then she says, quote, "I think I'm in Virginia," end quote.
Wow.
And then she says, "Bye," and she hangs up. Now, a few minutes later, the phone rings again, and this time it's answered by Brenda's stepdad, or perhaps it was her mom's boyfriend. There are conflicting accounts of which one he actually was. And she repeated what she had said in the last telephone call, adding, quote, "Did my mom see me?" end quote, and indicating she was alone in a house with a white man. And her stepdad says, "If your mom saw you, she would have gotten you." And then he said, "Just tell me where you are, I'll come get you." And then he asked her to have the man come to the phone. And he hears heavy footsteps in the background, and Brenda starts to cry and says, "I'll see you," end quote, and she hangs up.
Wow.
Brenda's mom gets home about that time and hears about the phone calls, and she calls the police. And the police show up, and they're thinking Brenda probably called home at the command of the killer, who fed her inaccurate information in order to buy time so he could rape her and kill her, all while hampering the investigation. He probably wasn't a white man. She probably wasn't in Virginia. That's what they're thinking.
Right.
At 5:50 a.m. the next day, July 28, 1971, a hitchhiker is walking along U.S. Route 50 near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway in Prince George's County, Maryland. He finds little Brenda Crockett's lifeless body. She's lying on her back on the side of the road just past the guardrails. She's in plain sight. She had been raped and strangled. A green scarf was knotted around her neck. Brenda wasn't wearing shoes when she headed off to the grocery store the night before. So it wasn't unusual that she wasn't wearing shoes when she was found, but the bottoms of her feet weren't dirty, and police thought that perhaps her killer had washed them. In fact, the police thought that perhaps her whole body had been washed. She wasn't missing shoes, but she was missing a hair curler. Now, police think the hinky phone calls carried with them some clues. Quote, "Did my mother see me?" end quote. Brenda asked this question, which makes police think that maybe the killer thinks that the mother or someone else has seen him abduct her. But of course, police can't trace the call, so it's a dead end all over again.
Right.
October 1st, 1971, 12-year-old Nenomoshia Yates is walking home on Benning Road around 7 p.m. from a Safeway store in Northeast. Neno is a 6th grader at Kelly Miller Junior High. She'd been sent to the store by her dad, and she lived with her dad and her stepmom. Her stepmom had just given birth, and her dad is juggling his time between the hospital and being at home to take care of Neno. And the Safeway grocery is 1 block from their home. These little girls are taken so close to their house every single time. Neno makes it to the store. She buys the groceries, sugar, flour, and paper plates, and is seen leaving the Safeway around 7 p.m. She will never make it back home again.
Wow.
A Safeway employee would later state that they found the same items Neno had purchased, sugar, flour, paper plates, scattered along the street like whoever had been carrying them had disappeared into thin air. 2 hours later, her body is found just off the shoulder of Pennsylvania Avenue in Prince George's County, Maryland. She's found by a 16-year-old hitchhiker who stumbled upon her body. The medical examiner says she's been raped before she was strangled, and the coroner noted that the strangulation was excessive because Neno's esophagus has been crushed.
Oh, wow.
Unidentified green fibers are found on her clothing, and a witness apparently saw her getting into a blue Volkswagen, and although this is investigated, the lead goes nowhere. When she is found, she is missing her shoes.
Again, with the shoes.
Again with the shoes. So this community is so angry. 4 little girls have been murdered and raped, and the neighborhood thinks they're all connected because they are.
Mm-hmm.
And people want answers, and parents feared for their children's lives.
Of course.
And the newspapers had been sending reporters into these neighborhoods where the girls have gone missing. So even if the police aren't sending the cops, the reporters are showing up, and they're writing these headline stories. And this is when the killer gets his name, the Freeway Phantom. And it was first used in a daily news article, which is a paper that no longer exists. And they used it because they suppose in their article that it's one killer, and they call him the Freeway Phantom because the case is made in the article that the killer is using the 295 freeway to stalk his victims and make his escape.
Gotcha.
So actually, the newspaper is doing a better effing job than the police are at this point.
Yep.
Now, the local D.C. police aren't convinced that it's just one killer, but then the FBI steps in. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah.
Somebody steps in, and they have the forensics that the local police don't have access to. So the police and the FBI go through all the evidence from all 4 murders. All 4 have been strangled. 3 of the 4, there were African-American hairs in their underwear that did not appear to be their own. So they're thinking the killer is a black male. And after looking at all the evidence, they decided exactly what the people in the neighborhood had been saying all along. These 4 murders were committed by the same person.
Right.
And if that's the case, this is DC's first serial killer ever.
Wow.
On November 15th, 1971, 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard goes to night school at Cardoza High. She's hoping to improve her work skills like typing. And after school, she goes to Ben's Chili Bowl on U Street with a friend. And after having dinner with this high school classmate, Brenda boarded a city bus at 10:25 p.m. headed to Northeast. At 8th and H Streets Northeast, Brenda got off the bus to catch another bus to her home on Maryland Avenue Northeast. It was around 11:30 p.m. when she gets on the second bus. Approximately 6 hours later, in the early morning of November 16th, a police officer, David Norman, happened to be driving in the region and discovered her body on the grass by an access ramp to Route 202 from the Baltimore-Washington Parkway near Prince George's County's hospital. Quote, "I shined my flashlights into her eyes to see if there was life. She didn't blink. She didn't do anything." End quote. Brenda had been raped and strangled, then stabbed multiple times. This murder was more violent than the others, with 6 stab wounds to various parts of her body, and she had defensive wounds on her hands and arms. I think it's important to note that these girls are being dumped just on the side of the road. They're not really being hidden or anything.
Yeah, it's very sloppy.
Yes, but yet
Nobody knows who he is or where he is.
Nobody knows who he is.
Yeah.
Brenda's body was near a bus stop that her mother went to every day. Her mom was actually waiting for her bus. She walks over to where all the commotion's going on, and this is how she finds out that her daughter had been murdered. Unlike the other victims, Brenda was still wearing her shoes. She had on black boots, and a crushed velvet coat was placed over her chest. And I read in one account that it was as if it had been gently placed on a child who'd fallen asleep on the couch. And in one of the coat's pockets, police find a handwritten note from the killer to the police. And this is what it says.
Okay.
"This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can. Signed, Freeway Phantom."
Yeah, gee. So this person's getting off on the fact that he's getting press and a name.
Getting press. They've given him a name.
Yeah.
But there's something I want you to hear.
Okay.
The very first sentence, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people." Remember that word.
Yeah.
That's called foreshadowing.
Okay. Yeah, because tantamount isn't usually a word that people use in everyday conversation.
Very good, honey. You're
Thank
so
you.
good at this true crime stuff.
I'm learning. I'm getting better.
You are. In the beginning, they think the note is written by the killer, and then they realize this is actually Brenda's handwriting.
What?
The note was written on paper, cut from Brenda's school notebook It was her handwriting. So the killer had dictated to Brenda, and she wrote what he told her.
Oh, my goodness.
And police also speculate that given the absence of indications of duress in the writing, that she may have known her kidnapper. I do have a copy of the note. I'll post it in the In-Laws and Outlaws. But what they're saying, obviously, is that it doesn't look like Brenda was afraid when she was writing out this note.
But when you, I can't buy that, because just the content of the note itself would freak me out if he's making me write it.
True.
Yeah.
But what they're saying is there was no stress. There was no shaking, no hand trembling. I mean, once again, I will post the note.
Okay.
It's pretty straightforward.
Right.
And they even said maybe it was a friend. Maybe she thought it was a joke.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
So also the police and FBI are intrigued by the use of the word, just like Rob said, tantamount, which means equivalent in seriousness to or virtually the same as.
Right.
There's your definition for the day. And the FBI thinks the note has been written to someone in particular. And Special Agent Barry Colvert said that the note is saying, quote, "The reason I did this is because you made that judgment of me," end quote. He's getting even with somebody or something.
Okay.
After examination of Brenda's clothes, they find 2 different hair samples, one belonging to a Caucasian male and the other to an African-American male. Now, the death toll is now 5 dead girls. The media is really involved because they're running these stories nonstop. And police don't know if Brenda was killed by the same person who murdered the first 4 girls, because Brenda's been stabbed 6 times.
Right.
And the other girls had not been stabbed. And the other girls were younger, and Brenda was 18, and Brenda still had her boots on. Then suddenly, the murders stop. And almost a year later, on September 5th, 1972, he strikes again.
Okay.
17-year-old Ballou High School senior Diane Denise Williams was known for her impeccable fashion sense. She was an aspiring model and had just started her senior year at Ballou High School in D.C. Diane was beautiful and intelligent, and according to her sister Patricia, she always thought Diane would be a singer or an actress or a model. I have seen her pictures. She's gorgeous. On the night of September 5th, she cooked dinner for her family and then went to visit her boyfriend, James. She went to his house. She was last seen boarding a bus at 11:20 p.m. near his house along Martin Luther King Avenue. James was with her until she got on the bus, so he waited with her at the bus stop till the bus arrived.
Okay.
Diane will never make it home. A few hours later, her body is discovered dumped alongside I-295 just south of the district line by a trucker. He pulled over to the side of the road just south of the border separating D.C. from Maryland. It was 2 miles from Diane's house. And as with the other victims, she'd been strangled to death and her shoes were off her feet, but were resting near her body. The bottom of her shoes had her name written on them, Diana.
Okay.
There were no signs of sexual assault, although traces of semen were found in her clothing. But it was believed that that was from her visit to her boyfriend that night. But then James tells police, hey, we didn't engage in any sexual activity. And police now think that maybe it belongs to the killer. So we have DNA now, right?
Okay, right.
We have DNA.
Right.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
The FBI gets out all the evidence, including the clothing from the girls from the year before, because remember, he waited a year before he killed again. They're looking for anything they might have missed. And they find that green fiber that's found on all the girls, with the exception of Darlenia, whose body was too badly decomposed. So they've got this green fiber that was on everybody else's body. And they're thinking that green synthetic fiber is from carpet, from a car. So detectives and the FBI try to connect any known predator with the green carpet fiber. They focus in on Robert Elwood Askins. He's a middle-aged ex-convict who has a history of abduction, rape, and murder, and he worked at St. Elizabeth's Hospital as a computer technician through the 1970s.
Okay.
And the reason he's at the top of their list is because in one of his abductions, he tried to get the girl he picked up to tell police she was in Maryland, which is very similar
to the Virginia thing.
Yes, to Brenda Crockett calling and telling her stepfather that she was in Virginia. And he had one of his victims write a note. So they go and they interview some of the people that Robert Askins is associated with, and an unusual word comes up.
Let me guess. How about tantamount?
tantamount. It was a word that Robert used frequently in his everyday speech. Nobody uses tantamount in their everyday speech.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the first time in my life that I've said it out loud. So.
But then it gets hinkier. He wasn't just a current employee of St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the psychiatric hospital. He was also a former patient.
Uh-oh.
And he had been sent there in lieu of prison.
Oh, wow.
In December of 1938, when Askins was a much younger man, he had poisoned a sex worker in Washington, D.C. with potassium cyanide.
Wow.
The cause, he said, was revenge for him contracting a venereal disease from another sex worker earlier that year.
Mm.
The victim, Ruth McDonald, had actually died as a result of the poisoning, and Askins was later convicted for her murder. He spends 13 years in the hospital, and then in 1952, when he's re-indicted and convicted of the murder charges, he spent the next several years inside a real prison until his release in January of 1958, which was the result of a legal snafu that resulted in his release.
Mm.
So he's out, but he's really not supposed to be out.
Right.
And so all these things really point to him. So police get a search warrant for Robert's home, and they're looking for the source of the green synthetic fiber. They find some earrings, a knife, no green fibers, and nothing that belonged to the girls. He did have all these photos of unknown girls and young women, and they did find several women's scarves, which were described as, quote, soiled, end quote. He didn't live with any women, so why would he have women's scarves?
Right.
And remember, they had hair found in two of the girls' underpants. They were African American, but didn't belong to the girls.
Right.
And that's not a match to Robert either.
Okay.
So eventually, Robert Askins, he's going to die in prison in April of 2010 in North Carolina at the age of 91, where he was serving a life sentence for kidnapping and raping two women in 1977. But he definitely matches the profile. Middle-aged black man who lived in the neighborhood. He targeted similar victims and harbored a violent grudge against women.
Okay.
So he's the perfect killer, right?
Yeah.
And he loved to use the word tantamount. It was even in his legal paperwork during his murder trial from the 50s. And Robert's coworker said he used the word all the time. One of the original Freeway Phantom detectives wrote to him in prison asking him if he had any part in these girls' murders. And he said he didn't have the, quote, the depravity of mind required to commit any of the crimes, end quote.
Okay.
Which is a big fat lie.
Yeah.
But they didn't have anything that would stick to Robert Askins.
Right.
Then in 1974, they think they have another suspect, Morris Warren. But he's already in prison at the Lorton Penitentiary. A snitch inside the prison called a homicide detective and says Morris has information on the Freeway Phantom. He says Morris knew who kidnapped and killed the girls. So police go to the prison and they interview Morris. And at first he denied knowing anything about the death of the 6 girls, but then he started giving them a little bit of information. When the Freeway Phantom murders were happening, there was a series of kidnapping and rapes also happening where women were literally snatched off the street by suspects driving a green Chevy Vega.
Uh-oh.
I had an orange Vega, bright orange Vega, a 1972 baby.
Yeah, baby.
I drove it all through high school. Called him OJ. He didn't have air conditioning or power steering. It was like driving a tank. And I grew some biceps learning to parallel park it for my driving test. But I passed. I got 100% on my written test and a 90 on my driving skills.
And then you immediately took a nap.
I'm just saying, I'm an amazing driver.
Well, there you go.
Just ask me. Just ask me. But I had a bright orange Vega. It didn't have an orange interior. It had black interior.
Right.
But this green Vega, you would think that a green Vega would have green carpet fibers, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, several of these gang members had been arrested, and they were waiting indictment for these rapes. Not murders, mind you, just rapes.
Okay.
And Morris Warren is one of them. And Morris tells police that some of the Green Vega gang were actually the ones who kidnapped and killed these girls.
Okay.
He tells police that he knows details about each of the murders, including the dump sites and how the girls were killed.
Oh, wow.
Now, in exchange for this information, Morris wants to be released from prison,
Of course.
and he wanted part of the $10,000 reward in the Freeway Phantom case. So he's not asking for much.
So how do they know he's telling the truth? I mean, is he just saying this so he can get the money and get out? Or
Well,
what?
here's what they do. The FBI takes him on 2 different ride-alongs. They want to see what he really knows. They're going to test him.
Gotcha.
And on the first ride-along, Warren takes the FBI to where 2 victims were found, Brenda Woodard and Darlenia Johnson. And he's got the right spot, but his description of the crimes is wrong.
Okay.
He'd mix up which victim was which, and he'd get certain details of the crime scenes wrong, which led the investigators to believe he's not really credible.
Yeah, because, I mean, it was on the news where these girls were found.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the second ride-along, a news story comes on the radio, and Warren can hear it. He's in the back seat. And the news story states that the Prince George's state's attorney was closing in on who the Freeway Phantom was based on information given to them by an inmate who's currently housed inside the Lorton Penitentiary. They ratted him out, and they ratted him out publicly.
Wow.
So
Okay.
he's in the back seat, and he's hearing this story about himself
Oops.
giving information. So Warren has a go to pieces right there in the squad car. He knows he's the only one who's giving up information on the Green Vega gang, and people are going to know it was him. And all of a sudden, Warren clams up. He's done. Stick a fork in him.
Right.
But in the long run, it didn't matter because all the information from Warren falls apart when the investigators find out that the Green Vega, the exact car that was used by the suspects to kill all these girls, was not manufactured until after the spring of 1972. And the Freeway Phantom girls, most of those girls had already been murdered by then.
Wow.
Also, letters are intercepted between Morris and the Green Vega gang on the outside, and Morris admits to them that he lied to police and the FBI, that he just wanted a deal. He didn't want to spend the rest of his time in prison.
Gotcha. Yeah, just like we said.
So police eliminate Morris, and now they have no one. There were no more viable leads. And other cases come up, and the murders of these 6 girls is put on the sideline.
Again.
Yes. And after 1972, the killings stop. But what about the families of these victims? It destroyed these families, and no one at the police department had answers for them. And the families feel like the police sort of gave up on the case because they did.
Yeah.
And would they have given up so easily or put it on the back burner if the girls were white? I'm just going to say it. And even retired D.C. police officers have stated publicly that it would have been an entirely different investigation if these little girls were white.
Yeah. Especially during that time period.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in 1987, Detective Romaine Jenkins, who was a young African-American detective when the murders happened in 71 and 72, is now a sergeant. And she's like, I'm taking up this case. I'm a supervisor now over 7 homicide detectives, and we are back on it. But then she finds out that all the evidence for the case had been destroyed.
Oh, no.
Now, who in their right mind destroys evidence in an unsolved murder case?
Yeah.
But there's no evidence. Nothing. Every single piece of evidence in the case files, all gone.
It's a little hanky.
And the families are so angry because the police took tons of evidence from the homes of these girls.
Right.
And they never returned it.
Oh, wow.
And then they destroyed it.
Jeez.
Like, what the hell? So Sergeant Romaine Jenkins is fit to be tied at this point because in order for a police officer to destroy evidence, he or she has to show that the case is not open. And the case is clearly open.
Yeah.
The case is still open to this day.
Wow.
So Sergeant Jenkins has said that maybe because the case had been forgotten, that these cases had been forgotten, people thought it was closed, therefore the evidence was destroyed. But Sergeant Jenkins calls the FBI, and she starts to piece the murders back together again because the FBI had files that were marked, do not destroy, hold for historical preservation. And she was even like, why can't the D.C. police do this? But the D.C. police had the bulk of the information. They had the bulk
Gotcha.
of the files
Okay.
and the evidence.
Okay.
But this is only a piece of what she needs, what she's going to get from the FBI. She's got the coroner's reports, so she goes after the cops who covered the cases, and some of them were even retired, but they all handed over their notes, their personal notes on the case, and she got some good stuff. Now, the case file is open again, but she's got no evidence. They do create a profile of this killer, the Freeway Phantom, They believe he was a black man between 27 and 32 at the time of the murders. He was likely familiar with the areas in which the victims were found. He was also comfortable there. He would come off as charming and appeared friendly, but experienced difficulty maintaining relationships. He would likely be intelligent but hold no formal post-secondary education. He would likely have a steady day job. He likely had a poor relationship with a woman or women in his life that created a feeling of resentment towards women. Who's this sound like?
Yeah.
Mr. Tantamount.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds, it's him.
Yeah.
Then they map out where the bodies are found and come up with what they call the killer's comfort zones, areas where he may live or work. But the area is important to the killer. It could show where to look for or ask questions, which sounds like Robert Askins, right?
Yeah.
But then in 1994, Sergeant Jenkins retires, and she's disappointed that she didn't get an arrest. But so much of the information has been lost that could have helped solve the case. And after this, the city council gets involved. And now, in the Washington, D.C. area, murder information and case files have to be kept for 65 years. You can't destroy anything. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Right. And think about this. If they had evidence from these murders with the technology we have today, they could have discovered something. But they dropped the ball. They had hair. They had semen. They had green fibers.
Right.
One girl still had a green scarf around her neck.
Right.
In 2006, Detective James Tranium took on the case because most of the D.C. police reports and all the evidence in the cases had been lost or destroyed. Tranium, who started working the case in late 2004, first had to go outside his department to build a record of the police investigation. He found a trove of FBI reports at the Bureau's Washington field office and about 200 pages of scattered Prince George's County police files. But even the reports he obtained were missing pages, including notations about whether suspects had been ruled out.
Oh, wow.
So how are these things missing pages?
Was this just purely sloppy work, or was there something going on behind the scenes?
It's hard to know.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. But basically what he's doing is he's putting together a jigsaw puzzle without a picture and without the border pieces.
Yeah, he's trying to paint a picture without a canvas.
So he uses the incomplete files as a guide, and he goes through the cases one by one and calls in an expert who specializes in narrowing the field of suspects, Kim Rossmo, a former Canadian police officer and a professor at Texas State University, who had developed a computer system that plots crime events on a map and helps detectives determine where a suspect's anchor point or home or workplace or other significant location might be.
I'd like to see that algorithm.
Yeah, right? So they went looking through these reports together, and they visited the crime scenes. Rossmo then developed a geographical profile of the killer's movements, from abduction sites to where the bodies had been found. He believes the Phantom had an anchor point in Congress Heights, just south of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. St. Elizabeth's Hospital, where he worked.
Yep.
But it's also a mental asylum. So the first thing they ask is, was the killer familiar with the facility? Well, Robert Askins was.
Yep.
Was he a patient?
Yep.
Well, Robert Askins was.
Check.
A doctor or a worker who knew the area well? Check.
Check.
I mean, it's Robert. It's him. It's him all the way.
Right.
And way back in 1971 and 72, 24 detectives were assigned to the case along with FBI until June of 1972. When a bunch of bozos broke into the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate office building. And it's at this point that D.C. police and FBI shift their focus. And it's away from 6 dead girls and the Freeway Phantom and on to Watergate.
Oh, yeah.
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 It was a storm of things, of everything going wrong. Now, the D.C. police know that this is bad, and they have had detectives who have worked the case. These people take on the case, they get nowhere, and then they end up retiring feeling horrible that they didn't find the killer. But then they continue to search, and they want people to help because the Freeway Phantom took more than shoes. He took textbooks, he took curlers and shoelaces. So here's what they're saying. If you are cleaning out a relative's home or you're going through someone's things and you find a bunch of shoes, or things that would belong to younger girls, a hair roller, a textbook, anything hinky that doesn't seem like it should belong to this person,
right.
The D.C. police and FBI want to know about it.
Right.
The Freeway Phantom stopped killing in 1972. Maybe he was arrested and lived out his life in jail. Maybe he moved away. It's been 51 years since the first murder, and they're no closer to knowing who the killer was than they were in 1971.
Well, when you have a criminal like that that's actually good at what he does, and then you have a situation where, they don't even care if they find the killer or
I don't
not.
know that he was that good at what he did.
Well, if nobody saw him.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
There were no witnesses.
That's why they called him the Phantom.
There were no witnesses.
Yeah.
There were no witnesses. I will post all the information in the In-Laws and Outlaws. There is a $150,000 reward for any information leading to knowing who this person is. But one more time, here are their names. Carol Denise Spinks, Darlenia Denise Johnson, Brenda Faye Crockett, Nenomoshia Yates, Brenda Denise Woodard, and Diane Denise Williams. And yes, it is lost on no one that 4 of the 6 girls had the middle name Denise.
God bless them.
I will post all the information in the show notes and the phone numbers to contact if you have any information. But that is the story of the Freeway Phantom, and that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitched to Homicide listeners. This is Chris Calvert. I love doing research and writing about real crimes, but I also love writing about fictional people who commit horrible atrocities. When you're ready to take a break from true crime for fictional crime, go to chriscalvert.com, where you'll find all my books, including some free ones to get you started. Jane Doe is one badass chick who quietly hunts terrorists in the United States. The Sex and Lies books are all FBI and CIA cases with a little romance on the side. And coming summer 2022, Book 10 in the series, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, releases. You can find all of these books everywhere, and if you like to listen instead of read, you can find them all on Audible. So go grab a free book or take a listen. I love all the characters I've written. I've given them pain, ruined their lives, make them suffer, and maybe even throw in a heroic death. Or maybe they live to fight another day. Check it all out at chriscalvert.com, and thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
I think we should put up one of those surveys of who you think killed these little girls.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
After you've listened to the podcast too, do you think it is?
Yep.
Listen, I read so many reports. There's this one detective who was like, it's him.
Yeah.
It was him.
Yeah.
He died at the age of 91, but let people know who it is. They need to get to the bottom of it. But they had all this evidence. They had DNA.
I know.
And then it all got destroyed.
That's just crazy.
It's so frustrating. And I can't even imagine what these families have gone through.
Yeah, I feel bad for the families.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's lighten this up again and do a little Bless Your Heart.
Well, bless your heart.
Dateline, New Orleans, Louisiana. Nolans.
Nolans.
I love
Nola.
I love Nola. Headline, he got stuck in the weeds.
He got stuck in the weeds.
Yep.
Okay.
A young man attempting to join the local sheriff's office in New Orleans was arrested and charged with delivering marijuana to someone in jail. Important safety tip. If you're going to go into law enforcement, you probably shouldn't be trafficking. Call me wacky. Call me crazy.
Oh, my gosh.
Derek Webb, 20, was caught red-handed with 2 bags of weed during a search, the New Orleans Parish Sheriff Office said in a press release. Webb was a deputy recruit attempting to join the force until he was canned on Tuesday. Police said Webb admitted to successfully delivering marijuana to New Orleans jail on 2 previous occasions.
How many times did he take weed into the jail?
Well, he admitted to 2 previous times.
Okay.
Yeah. The weed was delivered, quote, in exchange for money received from a civilian, unquote, cops said. After Webb admitted to the deliveries, he was charged with 3 counts, each of possession with the intent to distribute, including contraband in prison and malfeasance in office. That's a big old list right there. That's gonna hurt.
Wait, go back. Did you say that he got money from the guys in jail or from somebody else?
Well, I said the weed was delivered, quote, in exchange for money received from a civilian, cops said.
Oh, okay. So from a civilian, not somebody in jail.
No,
Because I was like, where are they keeping the money?
Nah, well, we don't want to know that
Yeah,
either.
no.
Possession of more than 14 grams of marijuana is illegal in Louisiana.
But less than 14 is not.
Yeah, exactly. Louisiana. Police leaders did not say how much weed Webb had on him. But once again, if you're going to go into law enforcement, trafficking you should probably give that up.
Don't sell weed if you want to be a deputy in New Orleans.
What a moron.
Lesson learned.
Yeah, bless his heart.
Bless his heart. Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know of someone's heart who needs to be blessed.
Yes.
You can send it to me, Chris at hitchedtohomicide.com. I don't read them, I just pass them on, or you can use the drop-down menu.
Yep.
Where you can also suggest a case.
Yes.
There's a lot to digest in today's podcast.
Just all over the place.
So much. That's my wonderful husband over there.
That's my beautiful bride on the other side.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.